It's no secret that everything seems a little bit more expensive nowadays. We often blame the obvious culprits: the price to fill up the tank, the cost of a morning coffee, or investing in a block of cheese. But one expert says there's one thing that's costing us hundreds more each week that we don't even know about: our floating mortgage rate. In simple terms, the OCR official cash rate is set by the Reserve Bank. That's sort of like the wholesale rate for borrowing money, although there are other costs too. The banks chuck on an extra bit to make their profit. A few decades ago, these rates tracked at about 2% above the official cash rate. Now that's crept up to about 4%. It sounds small, but that increase could mean paying off your floating mortgage in 30 years instead of 20, or paying an extra $500,000 over a typical 30-year mortgage. That's hundreds of dollars a week. Way more than your favourite Colby slices. And worse than that, because most of our big banks are based in Aussie, those profits often end up overseas. So is it time the government stepped in? And joining us is the very man calling attention to this issue, George Carter. So, George, what is actually the problem here? Are Kiwis simply paying more than they should?
Well, that's what we've observed. If you look at the data over the last 20 years or so, you go back to 2000, the mortgage rates were typically about 2% above the official cash rate. And over time, the official cash rate has been dropping, but the variable rate hasn't been dropping quite so much. So now we're in a position where that gap has widened to about 4%.
And how do the banks justify that increase from 2 to 4%, or are they just hoping we won't notice?
Well, I think as interest rates are dropping, you probably don't notice so much. If your interest rates are dropping on the variable rate you're paying, you feel a little bit wealthier. The fact that the margin's expanding, you don't really notice so much. But of course, now that that's turning and interest rates are going up, that's when you really feel a pinch in the pocket.
Makes me angry. Does it make you angry?
I think it's around consumer awareness, really. And the figures that we were putting around this, we're thinking of a young couple that's starting out, they're buying a house, and they're probably going to be taking on $1 million mortgage. And that difference of that 2% of the spread in the margin changing, that's going to make over $600,000 of difference in interest payments over the life of the mortgage.
Gosh, it makes your eyes water. So would you like the government to step in? And if they could, what can they actually do?
Yeah, I generally think that the government stepping in probably isn't too helpful in setting pricing. What we're wanting to do is raise customer awareness, that when people are buying the services that they want, whether that's financial services or whether it's buying your coffees, you know what you're paying for, you know what you're getting, and you're paying a fair price for the service that you receive.
Is this a New Zealand problem, by the way, or does the same thing happen overseas?
It's hard to draw really good direct comparisons because mortgage markets are different, and the way that banks and regulations are structured are different in other countries. But on the variable rate mortgage, we know that the banks are probably over-earning in New Zealand.
Does this concern only apply to the floating or variable rates, or can it apply to fixed rates as well?
You'll probably see it most keenly in the variable rate mortgage. On the fixed rates, they're priced off what's called the swap spreads, and the swap spreads at the moment, on the 2 year are probably around 4%, just over 4%. So the banks are probably making about 2% on those, whereas we're seeing on the variable rate it's closer to 4%. So you're definitely noticing it more on the variable rate mortgage.
OK, what's your best tip? What's your advice for people watching? What can they do?
Well, I suppose like all things in your finances, know what you're spending your money on, negotiate where you can. The banks will negotiate on their variable rate mortgages, so have that conversation with them. Watch out for the pennies, but also keep an eye on those big ticket items too, because it will add up over time.
Hey, thanks so much for bringing this issue to our attention, George. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Kia ora, New Zealand. Welcome to Project. Look, Penny Gower is here, along with Newshub's Amanda Gilly sitting next to me. Welcome, Amanda. And most of us, I think all of us, have mortgages, so how are we all feeling, Paddy?
Well, I'm like you, Jesse. I'm actually angry. I'm bloody angry, and I just want to say to the banks, stop gouging off us. But I also want to say to Kiwis, get angry, get filthy at these guys. We don't get angry enough and try and shift around with the banks. We kind of let it go. We're willing to complain about the block of cheese or whatever else and the coffee, but when it's our mortgage costing us hundreds and thousands of dollars, get bloody angry at these gougers, Kiwis.
And I will say, with some of the things that we buy, we can get them cheaper overseas. We go cheaper overseas for clothing, and so maybe that brings the prices down here in New Zealand, but it's actually almost impossible to do that with a mortgage maybe at some time in the future we'll be able to say, hey, well, if you won't give me a good rate, I'll go to Australia or I'll go to the UK and borrow money there, and maybe that will bring the pressure that we need.
Here's one tip I learned from tonight, though, is you can actually negotiate harder with your bank. No one ever bothers, but you can, so go see your bank manager tomorrow.
That's what we need to do. So see you there tomorrow, 9 a.m.